Well, guys, welcome to another one. This is my take on a different topic once again, and I'm going through the history of Land Rover. It's a fantastic, very interesting, very complex little story, as you may or may not know. There are many stories, myths, folklore, mistakes, things that have been made up, and we've just gone with it for a long time. And it's very difficult to get to the actual thing as it happened because there is so much charm and so much mystery to the whole topic, to the whole story. We kind of hold on to the good stuff, you know what I mean? As my good friend Mark Twain said, don't let the facts get in the way of a good story. Well, here is my take on it. And I'm going to focus on this thing called Birmabright, which you might have heard about if you own a Landy. If you haven't, it's basically a metal. It's an aluminium. That was kind of a blend between magnesium and aluminium, although blend is a big word, because there was just a few percent magnesium in there. I think it gave it a bit more toughness, and it helped also with the workability of it, kind of. That's the one take on it. I'm not a TIG welder. I'm not very sure on the metallurgy of all this stuff, but basically Birmabright is just aluminium. Where the name comes from is this company called Burr Metal. And why that is because they were based in Birmingham. So Birmabright is basically a nickname given to this specific alloy that was used way back in the 30s already, before the war. And they used this aluminium alloy as well for the war effort during World War II. Basically building aeroplanes, parts for engines, all of this stuff. It was quite a well-used alloy, I would think, in the war. There was a lot of it being pushed out. Obviously, the war effort, everyone was on board. All the car companies too, even Rover, building everything from ammunition to machine guns to airplane engines, jet engine, the whole effort. All the manufacturing capability in England basically turned towards the war effort to try and win the war. And then from there, we'll carry on. And there comes in the second part of our story, because the one thing that Rover had helped do was to win the war. Now cost them, because everything had changed after the war. The economy was down. Britain was in debt up to their eyeballs. It was a time of austerity. There wasn't much money going around. People were living on food stamps, kind of thing, to try and rebuild the country. On top of that, a Rover was in the middle of everything at the time. They weren't Rolls-Royce, Bentley, or Jaguar at the time, but they weren't Ford, Austin, Wolseley, Morris at the bottom. They were right in the middle of everything. Quite a tight, small little run ship that was basically aimed at the mid-sector. So they were not super wealthy and they were not super cheap either. They were in the middle. The trouble was, they focused all their efforts on the war, just like a lot of other car companies. And now they're sitting with a factory that is basically formed for the war effort. And in fact, Solihull was actually built originally to build aeroplane engines. That was its original form and shape back in the day. So that's what it did really well. Now Rover's coming with their car production again after the war. They need to pick up things going again. And people aren't really that invested in their cars. And the trouble with that, well, it was a double whammy, because basically you had taxes, very heavy road taxes in England at the time, on anything luxury. So if you had a car, you're going to pay a lot of luxury tax on top of that, which is fine if you own a Rolls-Royce. You don't really worry about it. But down at the lower end, it's a different story, right? That part of it was very difficult to get through. Also, their cars weren't very popular anymore. The shapes were outdated. The technology had moved on once again from before the war. And people just simply weren't buying Rover cars anymore. They couldn't afford them, for one thing, because of the taxes and the austerity, and the economy was down. And then the other options around them were a lot more modern in a lot of ways. So Rover found themselves in a bit of trouble because they didn't have the money. They didn't have the money to develop a brand new car at the time, or not the way we see it as today, because it's a huge investment cost. I'm going to that as well in my book that I'm researching. And that is, you need to put up a lot of money up front before you've even started selling your cars, because you need to develop them, engineer them, test them, all of that stuff. And that takes a lot of time and money. And Rover was not in a position to do so because their factory has basically been doing the work for the war effort, and there wasn't any money coming in, not on that front. Pun alert. On the other hand, what they did see an opportunity for, and luckily, I would think, for the Land Rover story, the Wilkes brothers, Maurice and Spencer, saw a gap in the market because Maurice had an old army Jeep running around on his farm in Anglesey. He used that. He's a part-time farmer. Even Spencer had a farm on the Isle of, I'll put it down below, Isle of Wight, I'm not sure. But he used to use his old Rover 12 sedan on the farm around there. That's actually where the Land Rover name comes from, because his grounds manager saw him driving his modified Rover on his little, it's not a small holding, it's an estate. He said, hey, you're driving your Rover on the land. Kind of, that's where it came from. So the two brothers, both are farmers. There's an old Jeep. It's a bit worn out from the war. It's causing a little bit of issues. Now there's a problem with getting parts. There's obviously economy, taxes, imports, customs, duties, all of that stuff. Very familiar to today. So you can't get hold of parts. The dollar is expensive, and you need stuff that is locally made to boost the local economy. So what do? Well, you build a tractor. And that's exactly what the Series 1 became, in effect. It straddled that line between a tractor and a car. The reason for the Birmabright in the beginning is if your products weren't helping the country by rebuilding, manufacturing, or exporting so you could get some pounds in for the government, your steel would be rationed, right? And what are cars built out of? Steel. So now Rover had no production line, they had no demand for their products, and they couldn't even get steel because their products were luxury products and they were not prioritized. So you do a little bit of a radical thinking there, which is genius on their part. If you consider that the Series 1 was developed within a year, from the drawing and the sand on Red Wharf Bay to Amsterdam Motor Show, was a roughly 1 year, which is astonishingly fast. So now you've got an idea in your head. How do you make it happen? Well, you use the chassis of the Jeep, use that to make your engineering, your design, your testing. Then you need a body to put onto it. And if you don't have steel, what do? You look around for other stuff. And luckily there's a whole pile of this other stuff lying around from the war effort, because the war was suddenly over, but the war machine was still churning out so much capability at the time. Suddenly we got a surplus stock lying around of aluminium, and not just aluminium, Birmabright. And why do I mention Birmabright? That's not the only aluminium company. It's not the only metal steel production company out there, but Birmabright is in Birmingham. And where do you think Solihull is? Roughly half an hour away, something to that effect. Very circumstantial, coincidental as well, I think, that led to Solihull looking at Birmabright as their body to make the body out of. The chassis would be steel because aluminium is inherently not strong enough. It wasn't at the time. Times have changed a lot now. And using this aluminium sheets, they couldn't be formed as easily as steel can. It's kind of brittle, it'll tear, it'll stretch, it'll crack. So you need to have a very simple design. Something you can hammer out, I don't know, literally, something that could be formed by the hammer very easily and very fast over a shaping tool. So the design would be as simple as possible, flat sides, basic round roof, just the front wings got a bit of a shape, and beyond that, basically as simple and as easy and as cheap as possible. That was the plan, because I can't invest in heavy duty molding machines, you know, the stamps, the dies that stamp out pressings, the sides of cars, the roofs, the doors, all of that stuff. They couldn't do that. They were all set up for steel anyway, and now you go to aluminium. Aluminium doesn't work very well, and those designs of your steel presses are pre-war. It's old stuff anyway. So you're starting from scratch. You've got to make it cheap because you don't have the budget. You engineer it very fast, and something that could be easily made on the Solihull production line, which was still set up for the war effort in effect. So you had to like take all of the production methods, transform them into something that would be well, basically beneficial to the English economy and quick to make, cheap, and basically people needed it. The market they were looking at was farmers, forestry kind of things, mining, exploration, all of that stuff. A utility vehicle. This wasn't to basically go on the road. And the other side of that is, if you were a farmer and you had a tractor, your tractor was tax exempt. So that meant if the Land Rover was tax exempt, it would be classified as a tractor. And if you were classified as a tractor, you had a maximum speed of 30 miles an hour, which also explains a lot of what goes on in a series and a Defender. The whole idea was to use it off the road more than on the road. Although you could do both better than a Jeep, that was the idea, and built in England. So, circumstantially, Birmabright was right there. Aluminium was in big supply. No other manufacturers were using it. They couldn't really use it. Steel was the way to go if you had the public to buy your products. And the simplicity of the design was cheap and easy to make. Also that it was easy to form, because you don't have presses and dies. And the last point that people might forget is that this was a temporary solution. There's a saying in Land Rover land called 50 per week for 5 years, which basically comes down to 10, make it 12,000 cars. That's what Rover envisaged for their Land Rover model, just to tide them over until the new models of Rover came out. So it wasn't even a long-term project. And why do you spend a lot of time and money researching, engineering, designing on a temporary product? It's not even going to last that long. Also, the simplicity of the design meant it was easy to repair. You could take it apart, easy to maintain, way out in some jungle or a farming field in Zimbabwe or something. That was also part of it. So it's all very circumstantial. It came about because of Birmabright, as I said. It also came about because Morris and Spencer had farms, estates. They were using their cars on the estate, and they saw a gap in the market that nobody else did. So there's my take on it. I'm kind of ballpark. I know there's a lot of experts out there, probably 150,000 of you, keyboard warriors, armchair experts. Great. If you think you know better, let me know down below. This is what I've come up with. I'd like to believe it. Makes a good story anyway, so there you go with that. If you want to read more or find out some more about the history of Land Rover from where they started, way back in the 1800s, to where they are today, check out the link below. There you go. Birmabright, Solihull, Birmingham, two brothers, and post-war austerity. That's basically how you can sum up the Land Rover. Thanks for watching this one. Check out more videos up here if you like the Land Rover topic. Leave a comment down below. Give us a thumbs up. Thanks for watching. Catch you in the next one. Keep rolling.